Hello everybody, myself Dr. Shivakumar Bisurpur. Today we shall discuss about language change in English through the ages. So this is a CTE course in IGNOU. So in that CTE-01, in that let us discuss Unit 8 in Block 2. So today we shall let us have our vision on the nature of language change, the origin of the English language, Old English, Middle English, and Modern English. So these are things we'll discuss in detail today. Let us see. As we know that language is the cultural product of society. As human needs increase, language becomes more complex and tends to expand its range. There are more than 4,000 natural languages, some spoken by a few hundreds, and some spoken by over a billion. But the basic structure of human languages is amazingly similar. The purpose, function, domain, and sometimes the numbers may introduce changes in a particular language, but a language still remains a system of communication serving the communicative and cultural needs of a people, and hence change in a language is a natural phenomenon. For instance, we do not speak our mother tongue or use it in the same way as our forefathers did. Similarly, people in one area speak differently from the other areas within the same linguistic community. For example, Khari Boli is different from the Hindi spoken in Haryana, Telangana. Telugu is different from that spoken in northern Andhra, and the English spoken in London is different from that of New York or Delhi. Within the same community, one group of people, say for example, illiterate people, speak differently from the other, that is literate group. The same individual speaks informally at home and more formally when he or she meets others in a broad room. In a board room or lecture hall. But all these manifestations and varieties of language form part of a linguistic continuum. However, some of these variations may be temporary or limited, and others may be permanent and irreversible. When scholars speak of changes in language, they generally refer to the latter, but the so called irreversible changes have their origin in the former. Let us see the nature of language change. Change in a language means change in articulation, that is phonological, or in meaning, that is semantic, or in a grammar, that is morphosyntactic, or in words, that is lexical. Each language experiences all these changes with different degrees of impact. Let us take some examples. Uh, for example, number one, change of a that is change of a stop. Here in the Proto-Dravidian, it is Paul, and that is one is PA apostrophe L. Kannada hog, that is milk. Loss of vowel length and shift of meaning from positive to negative connotation. So, Kampu old Telugu fragments, modern Telugu stench. Shift from negative to positive connotation. Early modern English, nice, foolish. Modern English, good, attractive. Morphonymic change. Old Telugu, Sesanu, and did. Modern Telugu, Sesunu. So that is see no. For example, yes, I'll give you the spelling. I mean the letters of the spelling. C double E S double E N U. No. So if I'm wrong, please excuse me in pronunciation of this word. The origin of the English language. English is a foreign language to us, but it was so for the Britons as well. The island was originally inhabited by a people called Celts. After occupying Gaul in Normandy, Julius Caesar attempted to subjugate the Britons in 54 BC but failed. It was only in AD 43 that the Roman Emperor Claudius succeeded in occupying Britain, and this continued for 4 centuries. The fall of the Roman Empire and the withdrawal of Roman legions from Britain opened way to the invaders from the north who got firmly settled in the English islands, mostly in Northumbria. So here the Angles and Saxons who invaded Britain in AD 470 when called the Celts, Velas, that is foreigners, and drove them to Ireland and Wales. Remnants of Celtic can be found only in certain place names like Thames, Owen, X, Usk, Dover, London, Kent, etc. The early specimens of their language were based on Angles and Saxon, and for a period it was referred to as Anglo-Saxon. In the second phase, the Danes involved, the Danes invaded England, that is AD 787, and defeated the settlers in a series of battles. The Northmen, that is Danish Norwegian, came as plunderers, destroyed religious places, and ended up as rulers of a substantial part of England. But in the Battle of that is what Ethandun at Wessex, King Alfred the Great withstood the savagery of the Danes links. The Anglo-Saxon principalities or kingdoms were fighting with each other as well as against the invaders, and as a consequence, no one political center nor linguistic focus emerged out of the what is this intrinsic wars. So, at the time of Viking forays into the English isles, the five little kingdoms within a nation developed a sort of national tongue, that is, a conglomeration of several varieties of spoken English and rudiments of literacy. The functions and domains of language increased after a centralized political system dominated the society. New institutions, technologies, disciplines, etc., started emerging, which in turn led to the expansion of functions as well as domains of the vernacular language. So, Christianity was brought to Britain by the invading Romans in AD 54, but it spread only after the arrival of Saint Augustine around AD 600. The King of Kent permitted Saint Augustine to establish a church in Canterbury and preach Christianity. That is why even today the Bishop of Canterbury is the head of Christianity in England. Due to the spread of Christianity, religious literature flourished in the Old English period. Instead of runic script which they brought with them, the settlers started using Roman script for their language. This because possible as their language was only oral and they considered English to be more standard language because of its literacy in spite of the fact they had power over a vast territory of England in the central part called Danelaw. Okay, now comes Old English that is AD 450 to 1150. Okay, let us see the Indo-European family. English is a descendant of the Indo-European family of languages to which also belong our own Sanskrit as well as Greek, Latin, Albanian, that is Church Slavonic, Persian, that is Iranian, and so on. So, a glance at some of the etymologies indicate the affinity between all these languages. For example, is, I will give the spelling also. Is in Old English will become East, East in Gothic or Germanic, and will become Est in Latin. In Greek is Z, and Sanskrit as Ti. So let us see the commonality between the verb patterns of Sanskrit and Greek. See, for example, uh, in Sanskrit, Sanskrit language, dattapa will become diadat, and some dadami will become I give or dadami. So dadanti will become didanti. So like this, the accent changes here. Take the modern daughter languages of these subgroups. Say, for example, in English, Hindi, tree will become the, name will become na. So, if you take into account the Indo-European, the I mean the transformation, for example, Sanskrit that is Indo-Iranian. So in the Persian, so how this Persian, Hindi, Bengali will changes. So in the Germany, what happens? The Persian German will become Latin Romance in Italian, that is Russian, Balto, Slavonic, and Irish. Let us see the historical background for the growth of English. The English language is an offshoot of the Germanic branch of the Indo-European family of languages. It is the language of the Germanic invaders who settled in the British Isles. Because of its people's intellectual vigor, seafaring enterprise, and imperialist instincts, their language not only spread throughout the world but also incorporated much of its lexicon from other languages, other tongues. Considering the times, scholars say quite an amount of writing is available in Old English. Okay, for example, uh, that Old English correspond to modern English word by word, though certain words and forms have undergone replacement or change. But Old English is an inflectional language where word order plays but little role. See, for example, one of the earliest changes detected in the language of the Anglo-Saxon is called the I mutation. The settlers in England separated in space and time from their brethren in the German land. started pronouncing certain sounds differently from their cousins, as one would expect in all such cases of migration. For example, foil in food. Foils means feet. This is how the phonemic changes occurs. Changes operate only for a period of time and affect all the morphemes which meet the phonetic condition, but still some do not. Why we can only surmise. In all natural languages, changes are interpreted due to borrowing, analogy, onomatopoeia, and least frequency and literacy. Sometimes they may happen due to scribal errors too. However, most of the changes that do take place are predictable. That is, they go according to a pattern. Generally, substantial changes take place mostly in non-literate and semi-literate societies before standardization of norms and moderation took place. In England of the Old English period, there were three distinct regional varieties, and one or the other used to become dominant depending upon the power centers. One must bear in mind also that the Anglo Saxon communities were basically agrarian in economy and rural in habitat. Most of these reflected forms were either lost or moved or have undergone changes. For instance, the verbal changes are all gone by the beginning of the Middle English period. In course of time, many changes took place in the grammar, phonological system, morphological structure, and semantics of Old English. The impact of Danish invasion and Danelaw settlement on English has already been mentioned. For instance, altar, kalpa, missa, scholar, versus planta, rosa, and so on belong to this is. In addition to here, I would like to remember you. Kalpa means font, missa means mass, schola means school, versus mean verse. In addition, due to increased Christianization of the pagan Anglo-Saxon, many Latin words found their way into English. See, for example, let us go for how this Middle English has occurred. So, in that Middle English, we shall see. Now, let us see the Middle Age. So, in the Middle English, that is 1150 to 1500. In that, let us see the historical background. Before the dust settled, dust settled on English life after the Viking invasions, there came the Norman invasion in 1066 to subjugate England for another couple of centuries. The Normans were originally the Northmen from Scandinavian and German lands who settled in Gaul, Normandy in northern France. They adopted a kind of French called Norman French, which became the court language in Britain. Here too, the Normans could not replace the English at the grassroots level, which explain the fact that English survived while England lost. Though institutions like the universities and the monasteries encouraged the use of French, the local population's attitude to French was indifferent, if not downright hostile. The Normans dispossessed the English of their lands. Suddenly, The English became tenants instead of landlords. But the common man, uh, what do you say? The common man clung onto their language as a sort of protest against the Norman French. Now that the English and the Normans have been dwelling together, marrying and giving in marriage, the two nations have become so mixed that it is scarcely possible today. Speaking of free men to tell who is English and who of Norman race. English survived because the Normans constituted only about 2% of the population and the strong literacy and oral traditions helped English sustain itself during this dark period. Under the Norman dispensation, no English literature seemed to have emerged. Now, the transition from Old English to Middle English. The transition from Old English to Middle English was revolutionary from the linguistic point of view. From a highly structured inflectional system, English got rid of inflectional endings and transformed itself into a word order fixed system. English resurgence, both language and literature, took place with a vengeance. Middle English literature is scientific because new genres of art were introduced in English for the first time. English for official purposes, allegories, proverbs, personal letters, translations from contemporary European languages, biographies, and romances, religious transitions, and so on. The process of simplification of word classes happen due to some internal phonetic charges, which we so uh, we have seen some internal phonetic changes. Survival of the fittest of two or more available forms, analogy and role models in speech. The Norman conquest of Britain, though politically a calamity to the English, was in fact a blessing in disguise linguistically. The Middle English period signifies the clash between stability and change in the language. Speech was undergoing changes, but writings were getting standardized. So, this is about Middle Age. Though the Old English was high colloquial, but Middle English was moving more and more towards standardization. Its spellings, forms of words, lexicon, syntactic structures, etc., started getting formalized. Uh, now, let us see how the uh, words and the the language, the phonemes and morphemes, syntax and semantics were used in the modern English. That is AD 1500 to the present. The printing press. If there is one person to whom the English language owes a great deal, it is Caxton, the tradesman turned printer. In devising a system of printing a language spoken and written variously by people of different regions, Caxton arbitrarily used a system on his own. He was guided not by knowledge but by a profit motive and convenience. How could he satisfy everyone? So he used his own judgment and contributed his share of confusion to spelling in the early text. The early modern period. English is the early modern period faced challenges of recognition as a language for learned communication, B. consolidation and standardization of its spelling and orthography, lexicon and grammar, and C. incorporation of new lexicon that was inauditing the language through new discoveries. Influx of foreign words into English was through three channels. That is Latin and Greek. First one, because they were regarded as languages of scholarship and intellectual interaction. And Franklin Bacon severely opposed the use of English for anything but mundane matters. Second one, other major European languages, because the English people for the first time explored the continent on their own volition and found Italian, Spanish, French, Portuguese, etc., rich with never vocabulary and branches of knowledge. Languages of Asia, Africa, and the Americas because of new discoveries, settlements, conservation, and exploration. A language usually becomes a standard when it is used in the practical and cultural center of country. For English, London provided this focus. The influence of the triangle of Eastern England, that is London, Oxford, Cambridge, was too strong to be ignored. The rest of the country followed and accepted the variety spoken in this small strip of land because of political influence and intellectual authority. Major linguistic uh, changes. The degrees of comparison got established. Adjective er ist became regular. The plural was generalized except in a few irregular forms. And archaic doublets, thou, were lost. In the verb padding, the third person, it, ending slowly gave to way is. The Great Vowel Shift, one of the most important changes that took place in English between the Middle English stage to the modern English is to so-called Great Vowel Shift. The, the long vowels of Middle English tended to become diphthongs in the modern period. So that is Middle Ages how uh, shifted to the modern English. Let us see present day English. After these developments in the English language, not much has changed till the 20th century. During the Renaissance period, the controversy centered around enrichment through borrowings versus native purity. Due to the spread of English across the world, as a consequence of the global expansion of the British Empire, certain new phonetic changes have entered English of the natives as well non-native users of English. The age of conditioned and predictable changes in English is over. In modern times, the conditioned phonetic changes have been replaced by a series of socio-linguistic changes in the language. And the lower economic classes imitate the speech of the upper classes and attempt to pronounce these words, the words with an ra. Secondly, persons of all classes tend to pronounce or as the conversation shift from casual talk to formal talk. So, uh, in the US, English language has developed its own special features in spelling. honors versus honor, lexicon, apartment versus flat, syntax, appreciate if you could versus request you to, phonological, can't for cannot, and so on. Similarly, Indian English has its own peculiar features, though in the area of spelling we follow British English in general. For instance, lexical translations for kinship terms, co-son-in-law, cultural translations, turmeric ceremony for betrothal, analogical creations, walkable distance for walking distance, mistress for wife, etc. Socio-political concepts, Gherav for forceful confinement of an official, and so on. Phonological approximations, that is substitutions of long vowels for English diphthongs, gate for gate, gate, retroflexes for alveolus, bet for bet, and so on. Some are accepted and some are not. It depends on how long we continue to use it and for what purpose. Even among some of our newspapers and magazines, there are variations in the acceptance levels. Some have more Indian sins than others. This is about English in the present scenario. Hope you understood the today's discussion, and wear the mask and maintain the social distance, and don't forget to subscribe. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe, and utilize the more discussions on the part of video which are coming in the uh, next few days. Thank you for cooperation, and thank you one and all. Thank you.